They don't want you to know this. There exists a mental technique so powerful that it was allegedly used by some of the greatest minds in history. Nikola Tesla, Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein. Yet it has been deliberately buried, systematically ignored, and completely erased from modern education. Why? Because if you knew how to unlock this banned brain hack, you wouldn't just be smart. You'd be dangerously intelligent. The kind of intelligence that questions everything, sees patterns others can't detect, and thinks at a level that breaks reality's limits. And that's exactly what you're about to learn. This isn't just another program promising incremental improvements. This is one of the most controversial mind-altering guides ever created. We're going to break it down step by step, revealing exactly how to access this hidden power, the intelligence formula they never wanted you to have. Think about it. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to process information at supernatural speeds? Why certain individuals can master complex subjects in months, while others struggle for years? Why geniuses throughout history have made breakthroughs that seemed impossible to everyone else? It wasn't luck. It wasn't genetics. And it certainly wasn't the standard education system. Nikola Tesla didn't just invent the technology that powers our modern world. He visualized entire machines functioning perfectly in his mind before building a single component. He claimed he could run mental simulations for weeks, identifying and fixing flaws without lifting a finger. Leonardo da Vinci didn't just paint masterpieces. He developed a way of seeing reality in layers, patterns, and systems that allowed him to make discoveries in anatomy, engineering, and physics centuries ahead of his time. Einstein didn't solve the mysteries of the universe by memorizing formulas. He imagined himself riding on a beam of light, experiencing how space and time would warp around him. A mental technique that led to the theory of relativity. These weren't just talented individuals. They were people who discovered a different way of using their minds, a mental operating system that most of humanity has never accessed. And here's where the conspiracy begins. Throughout the 20th century, as mass education spread worldwide, these advanced thinking techniques were systematically removed from curriculums. The education system wasn't designed to create independent thinkers. It was engineered to produce obedient workers, people who memorize rather than understand, who follow rather than lead, who accept rather than question. The evidence is all around you. Think about your own education. Were you ever taught how to visualize complex systems in your mind? Were you trained to run mental simulations? Did any teacher show you how to think in images and movements instead of just words? Of course not, because someone with these abilities becomes impossible to control, impossible to program, impossible to limit. Look at how the average person processes information. They read words on a page. They try to memorize those words. They regurgitate those words on command. And a week later, they've forgotten 90% of what they learned. Now look at how a genius processes the same information. They convert concepts into mental movies, experiencing ideas as if they were happening in real time. They challenge every assumption, asking, what if this were completely wrong? They purposely overload their brains with contradictory information, forcing new neural pathways to form. The difference isn't IQ. It isn't genetics. It's methodology. It's the operating system running on the biological supercomputer between your ears. Here's the most shocking truth of all. Your brain already has the hardware for genius-level intelligence. Right now, today. The problem is that no one ever gave you the software, the mental techniques, the thought patterns, the visualization methods that activate your brain's true potential. That's what we're about to change. In the next hour, you're going to learn exactly how to absorb information 10x faster than normal people, process complex ideas effortlessly, see connections and patterns that others miss completely, think in multiple dimensions instead of linear steps, develop the same mental techniques used by history's greatest thinkers. These aren't exaggerations. These aren't metaphors. These are the documented abilities of people who've discovered this hidden mental operating system, abilities that you're about to develop yourself. But first, a warning. What you're about to learn will fundamentally change how you think, how you perceive reality, and how you interact with the world. Once you install these mental techniques, you can't go back. You'll start seeing flaws in systems everyone else accepts without question. You'll recognize patterns and connections that were invisible to you before. You'll think at a level that might separate you from others. This isn't just about becoming smarter. It's about upgrading your entire reality. Are you ready for that responsibility? Are you prepared to see the world as it actually is, rather than the simplified version most people experience? Because once you activate these forbidden brain hacks, there's no returning to conventional thinking. If you're still with me, then you're ready to begin this journey. You're ready to unlock the genius-level intelligence that's been dormant inside you. The same mental abilities that powered history's greatest minds. Let's begin with Chapter 1, The Lie About Intelligence, where we'll expose the fundamental deception that's been limiting your mental potential your entire life. The intelligence formula they never wanted you to have starts now. They've been lying to you about your own brain. Look around you. We all know that person. The one who seems to grasp complex concepts effortlessly, who sees solutions that leave others scratching their heads, who processes information at speeds that seem almost superhuman. And what's your first thought when you encounter such brilliance? If you're like most people, it's something along the lines of, I wish I had been born with a brain like that. That thought, that simple, seemingly innocent belief, is the biggest intellectual scam ever perpetrated on humanity. From your earliest school days, you've been fed a carefully constructed narrative that intelligence is fixed, predetermined by genetics, set in stone from the moment of your birth. This narrative tells you that people are smart or they aren't. End of story. Some are blessed with good brains, while others must struggle through life with average or below average cognitive abilities. This belief isn't harmless. It's a mental prison, and the moment you accepted it as truth was the moment you placed artificial limitations on your own potential. Every time you thought, I'm just not good at math or I don't have that kind of brain, you were reinforcing the bars of this prison. A prison built not of steel, but of false beliefs. But what if everything you've been told about intelligence is a deliberate lie? Consider this uncomfortable truth. Our modern education system wasn't designed to maximize human potential. It wasn't built to create independent thinkers, visionaries, or intellectual revolutionaries. It was constructed piece by methodical piece to produce something else entirely: obedient workers. Look at the structure: rigid schedules dictated by bells, standardized testing that rewards memorization over understanding, punishments for questioning authority, rewards for conformity and rule following. Does this sound like a system designed to nurture the next Einstein or Tesla? Or does it more closely resemble a training ground for producing adults who will fit neatly into predetermined societal roles? The Industrial Revolution needed workers who would reliably perform repetitive tasks without questioning the system. It needed human cogs, not independent thinkers. And so an education system was born that emphasized memorization over critical thinking, following instructions over creative problem solving, accepting information rather than questioning it, standardization rather than intellectual exploration. This system isn't failing. It's succeeding spectacularly at what it was actually designed to do. The failure is in what we've been told it's supposed to accomplish. Now consider how history's greatest minds approached learning and thinking. Did they conform to conventional educational methods? Einstein was considered a poor student. He rejected rote memorization and instead engaged in what he called thought experiments, vivid mental simulations where he would imagine scenarios like chasing a beam of light. This visualization-based thinking led to his breakthrough theories that transformed physics. Tesla designed entire machines in his mind, running complex simulations and predicting how they would function before ever putting pencil to paper. He once said, "The gift of mental power comes from God, divine being, and if we concentrate our minds on that truth, we become in tune with this great power." Leonardo da Vinci learned through relentless observation and questioning. He dissected corpses to understand anatomy when others accepted ancient texts as definitive. He filled notebooks with questions, challenging established facts that others blindly accepted. The pattern is clear. These extraordinary minds didn't excel because they were better at following the standard educational path. They excelled precisely because they rejected that path and developed their own mental frameworks. Here's the liberating truth. Genius isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. Every hyper-intelligent person you've ever admired got there through a specific mental framework that allowed them to absorb information many times faster than average, process complex ideas with seeming effortlessness, break down problems, and see solutions invisible to others. Think in ways that appear to defy conventional logic. The most dangerous part? This forbidden brain hack has existed for centuries. It's not new. It's not unproven. It's been utilized by history's greatest minds and then systematically erased from modern education. Why would such powerful techniques be hidden from the masses? Because a population that thinks at genius level is inherently harder to control. A society of independent, critical thinkers asks uncomfortable questions. They challenge systems. They don't blindly consume. They don't obediently follow without understanding why. In other words, they're dangerous to the status quo. The most remarkable aspect of this entire situation is that your brain, yes, yours specifically, already possesses the raw hardware necessary for genius-level thinking. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons forming trillions of connections, making it the most complex object we've discovered in the universe. This biological supercomputer sitting inside your skull is capable of feats of cognition that put our most advanced artificial intelligence to shame. The problem isn't your brain's capability. It's that no one ever gave you the instruction manual. You've been trying to operate this incredible machine with the equivalent of factory settings, never knowing that you could upgrade the entire operating system. That's what separates the intellectual giants from everyone else. It's not that they were given better brains. It's that they discovered how to use their brains differently. They found, often through necessity, accident, or rebellion, the mental frameworks that unlocked their cognitive potential. And that's exactly what you're about to learn. In the next chapter, I'll reveal the exact brain hack that has been hidden from mainstream education. The same technique used by history's greatest thinkers to process information at superhuman speeds, see patterns invisible to others, and solve problems that seemed unsolvable. This isn't about becoming marginally smarter. This is about fundamentally transforming how your mind works, upgrading your mental operating system to access levels of intelligence that will completely change how you experience reality. Are you ready to learn what they've been hiding from you? Because once you understand this technique, you'll never think the same way again. Your brain is capable of far more than you've been led to believe. Let's start with a fundamental truth that neuroscience has confirmed, but mainstream education rarely acknowledges. Your brain is not fixed or static. It's not a machine running at the same capacity throughout your life. It's a dynamic, constantly evolving biological supercomputer that rewires itself every single second of every day. This process, called neuroplasticity, means your brain physically changes based on how you use it. When you learn something new, your neurons form new connections. When you practice a skill repeatedly, those neural pathways strengthen. When you abandon old habits, those pathways weaken and eventually disappear. Your brain is literally sculpting itself in response to your thoughts and actions. The implications of this are profound. If your brain physically changes based on how you use it, then intelligence isn't a fixed trait but a dynamic process. The question isn't how smart are you, but rather how are you smart? And how could you become smarter? This is where most people hit a wall. Despite having this incredible adaptive machine in their heads, they continue to run on what I call the default factory settings installed by society. They process information the same way at 35 as they did at 15. They approach problems with the same mental tools year after year. They never upgrade their mental operating system. But certain individuals throughout history discovered how to hack this system. They developed mental frameworks that allowed them to process information differently, faster, deeper, more comprehensively. These weren't just small improvements. These were quantum leaps in cognitive functioning that allowed them to see solutions, patterns, and possibilities invisible to everyone else. At the core of this mental hack is what I call hyper-experimental thinking. While most people process information in a linear, sequential manner, like reading text on a page or following steps in a manual, geniuses engage with ideas as dynamic, multidimensional systems. Instead of thinking in words, lists, or isolated facts, they create comprehensive mental models. They don't just read about a concept. They mentally experiment with it as if it were happening in real time. They test it, manipulate it, break it apart, and reconstruct it. This is why Einstein didn't begin with mathematical equations when developing the theory of relativity. He began by asking what would happen if he could ride alongside a beam of light. He created a mental experiment, experiencing the physics problem rather than just analyzing it intellectually. Similarly, Tesla didn't start with blueprints. He constructed complete machines in his mind, tested their functionality, identified flaws, and corrected them, all before drawing a single line on paper. He famously said he could run these mental models for weeks, noting when parts would wear out. Da Vinci studied human anatomy not by memorizing existing texts, but by questioning everything and conducting his own investigations. He approached knowledge as something to be experienced and tested rather than simply absorbed. Now, you might be thinking, that's great for history's rare geniuses, but how does this help me? The answer is that these aren't innate abilities. They're learned mental frameworks. And I'm going to break down exactly how you can implement them, starting today. Most people absorb new information passively. They read words on a page, listen to someone speak, or watch a demonstration. They might take notes, try to memorize key points, and later attempt to recall this information. This is why most people forget 80% of what they learn within a week. Geniuses approach learning completely differently. Instead of passive absorption, they engage in what I call experiential knowledge processing. They transform concepts into multi-sensory mental experiments that they can manipulate and explore. Here's how to implement this technique. When learning something new, don't just try to remember it. Experience it. If you're learning about history, don't memorize dates and names. Instead, mentally transport yourself to that time period. What would you see? What would people be wearing? How would they speak? What would the environment feel like? If you're learning a new skill, don't just follow instructions. Create a detailed mental model of yourself performing that skill perfectly. Feel the movements, notice the sensations, experience the sequence of actions from beginning to end. If you're trying to understand a system, whether it's a business process, a physical mechanism, or a social dynamic, don't just analyze its components. Create a mental model of the entire system in operation. Follow the flow of energy, information, or resources through the system. Identify bottlenecks, accelerators, and feedback loops. This technique activates far more of your neural circuitry than conventional learning. Instead of engaging just your language centers, you're recruiting sensory processing regions, emotional centers, spatial reasoning areas, and more. This creates richer, more robust neural networks that make information easier to recall and apply. Action step. The next time you're learning something important, pause after each key concept. Close your eyes and transform that concept into a complete mental experiment. Experience it as vividly and completely as possible. Explore it from multiple angles. Test how it works in different scenarios. Do this for just 30 seconds per concept, and you'll find your comprehension and retention dramatically improve. Most people think inside self-imposed boxes. They accept facts as presented, solve problems using established methods, and operate within the boundaries of what they've been taught is possible or correct. This conventional thinking creates severe limitations. Every field throughout history has been revolutionized by people who asked a simple question: what if the established view is wrong? Einstein asked, what if time isn't constant? This seemingly simple question shattered Newtonian physics and led to the theory of relativity. Tesla asked, what if energy could be transmitted without wires? This question led to breakthroughs that transformed how we use electricity. Da Vinci asked, what if the human body works like a machine with discoverable principles? This question advanced anatomy beyond the superstitions of his era. The what-if method is about systematically challenging assumptions and erasing mental limitations by posing counterfactual questions that force your brain to explore previously unconsidered possibilities. Here's how to implement it. First, identify a problem you're working on or a field you're studying. Then, list the fundamental assumptions or truths in that area. Now, systematically challenge each one with a what-if question. For example, if you're trying to improve your productivity, you might start with the assumption that more hours worked equals more output. Challenge it with, what if working fewer hours could increase total output? This single question could lead you to explore research on productivity bursts, recovery cycles, and diminishing returns. The key is to momentarily suspend disbelief and fully explore the implications of your what-if scenario, even if it initially seems impossible or absurd. This process forces your brain to create new neural pathways instead of traveling along familiar ones. Action step. Choose one field or problem you're currently working with. Identify 3 fundamental assumptions in that area. For each assumption, create a what-if question that directly challenges it. Spend 5 minutes exploring the implications of each alternative possibility. Do this daily, and you'll begin developing the same mental flexibility that characterized history's greatest innovators. Your brain grows stronger when it struggles with challenging problems. Just as muscles develop through resistance training, neural connections multiply and strengthen when forced to tackle difficult cognitive tasks. Most people avoid mental struggle. They stick to problems they know how to solve, questions they can answer, and topics they already understand. This is the equivalent of never increasing the weights at the gym. It leads to cognitive stagnation. Geniuses do the opposite. They deliberately pose seemingly impossible questions that force their brains to develop new problem-solving pathways. These aren't questions with known answers, but open-ended challenges that stretch cognitive capacity to its limits. Here are examples of the kinds of impossible questions that build superior neural networks. How would I solve this problem if I had unlimited resources? How could I explain this complex concept to a 5-year-old? How would historical genius approach this situation? What would a solution look like if all current limitations were removed? What's the connection between this problem and something in a completely different field? These questions are powerful because they force your brain to transcend conventional thinking patterns. When your mind can't find an immediate answer through established neural pathways, it begins creating new connections, drawing from diverse knowledge areas, and synthesizing novel solutions. Action step. Write down one impossible question related to a problem you're currently facing. Spend 5 minutes each morning contemplating it without worrying about finding a correct answer. Let your mind wander and make unexpected connections. Record any insights, even if they seem tangential. Over time, this practice will dramatically enhance your creative problem-solving abilities. Here's a counterintuitive truth. Your brain learns fastest when it's forced to process seemingly contradictory information. When your cognitive systems encounter perspectives or data that don't easily align, they must develop more sophisticated frameworks to accommodate this complexity. Most people avoid cognitive dissonance. They seek information that confirms what they already believe and ignore or dismiss contradictory viewpoints. This creates echo chambers that lead to intellectual stagnation. Geniuses do the opposite. They deliberately expose themselves to conflicting perspectives, forcing their brains to reconcile the contradictions in a higher-order understanding. This is cognitive overload training, intentionally flooding your brain with diverse and sometimes opposing information to accelerate neural development. Here's how to implement this technique. When researching any topic, seek out multiple conflicting viewpoints. For example, if you're studying an economic theory, read the strongest arguments both for and against it. Don't just skim these perspectives. Deeply engage with each one, temporarily adopting its viewpoint as if it were your own. The key is not to immediately judge which perspective is right, but to hold multiple viewpoints simultaneously in your mind, examining how they relate to each other. This creates a mental tension that forces your brain to develop more nuanced and sophisticated understanding. Action step. Choose a topic you're interested in. Find 3 sources with distinctly different perspectives on that topic. Study each perspective deeply. Then, instead of choosing one as correct, write a synthesis that incorporates the strongest elements of each viewpoint into a more comprehensive understanding. This exercise trains your brain to process complex, contradictory information at extraordinary speeds. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. If these techniques are so powerful, why weren't they taught in school? Why aren't they part of standard educational curriculum? The answer is uncomfortable but unavoidable. These methods create independent thinkers who question established systems. They produce individuals who can see through manipulation, identify flawed reasoning, and develop their own conclusions rather than accepting prepackaged thoughts. Throughout history, power structures have not typically rewarded such independent thinking. Educational systems were designed primarily to create productive workers and compliant citizens, not independent intellectual powerhouses who might challenge the status quo. But now you have access to these forbidden techniques. In the next chapter, I'll show you exactly how to integrate these methods into a daily routine that will systematically upgrade your mental operating system, allowing you to process information, solve problems, and generate insights at a level most people will never experience. The question is, are you ready to leave behind conventional thinking and step into a new level of cognitive functioning? Because once you implement these techniques, you'll never see the world the same way again. You've now learned powerful techniques to enhance your cognitive functioning. You understand the daily practices that can transform how your brain processes information and solves problems. But here's where most people fail. They experience initial improvement, get excited about their new capabilities, and then gradually slide back into old mental habits. This pattern is frustratingly common. Someone discovers a powerful brain hack, uses it consistently for a few weeks, experiences remarkable results, but then slowly abandons the practice. 6 months later, they're thinking exactly as they were before, operating on the same old neural pathways, processing information at the same speed, solving problems with the same limited tools. Why does this happen? Because they treat cognitive enhancement as a temporary project rather than a fundamental lifestyle change. They approach genius-level thinking as something they do occasionally, not as something they become permanently. Today, I'm going to show you how to avoid this trap, how to make your cognitive upgrade permanent rather than temporary. These 5 strategies ensure your enhanced thinking abilities become your new baseline rather than a fleeting peak experience. Most people compartmentalize thinking. They designate specific times for learning, problem-solving, or creativity, then switch their brain to autopilot for the remainder of the day. This creates a fundamental problem. Most of their life is spent reinforcing average thinking patterns rather than genius ones. To make your cognitive upgrade permanent, thinking must become a lifestyle rather than a scheduled task. Here's how to implement this shift. Stop separating thinking time from regular life. Instead, approach every experience as an opportunity for high-level cognition. When driving to work, don't zone out. Analyze the transportation system and identify its inefficiencies. While in a meeting, don't just focus on the agenda. Observe the group dynamics and question the underlying assumptions of the discussion. When watching a film, don't passively consume it. Analyze its narrative structure and psychological messaging. The key is making conscious, analytical thought your default state rather than a special activity. This doesn't mean you never relax. It means you engage with reality differently even during relaxation. For example, when walking through a park, most people either zone out or get lost in random thoughts. Try instead to observe patterns in nature, question why certain elements were included in the landscape design, or consider how the space influences human behavior. This type of engagement doesn't require additional time, just a different quality of attention to what you're already experiencing. By turning thinking into a lifestyle, you ensure that your brain is constantly strengthening genius-level neural pathways rather than reinforcing mediocre ones. Most people think at the lowest required level for any given situation. They ask basic questions, accept simple answers, and process information at the surface level. This is mental efficiency in one sense. It conserves cognitive energy, but it also ensures you never develop beyond average intelligence. To make your cognitive upgrade permanent, you must reset your default thinking level from basic to advanced. Here's how. Train yourself to automatically go one level deeper with every piece of information you encounter. Don't just ask, what does this mean? Ask, what are the deeper patterns here? Don't just learn a fact. Question how it connects to other domains. Don't just accept a rule. Investigate who benefits from it and why it exists. For example, when reading a news article about economic policy, don't just absorb the reported facts. Ask, what are the unstated assumptions behind this policy? What historical patterns does this resemble? Who gains power or resources if this approach is implemented? What second and third order effects might emerge that aren't being discussed? This default to depth doesn't require significantly more time, but it radically changes what your brain extracts from every experience. Over time, it creates a compounding effect where your understanding of reality becomes increasingly sophisticated and nuanced. The key implementation strategy is to develop automatic trigger questions that prompt deeper thinking. Whenever you learn something new, immediately ask, what's the principle behind this specific instance? How does this connect to something in a completely different field? What's the counterargument or alternative perspective? What assumptions is this based on, and are they valid? These triggers, used consistently, rewire your default thinking patterns from shallow to profound. Perhaps the most significant barrier to permanent intellectual enhancement is fixed mindset thinking, the belief that your intelligence has natural limits that can't be transcended. This belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, creating invisible barriers to your cognitive development. Geniuses operate from a radically different assumption. They believe their intelligence is constantly evolving, with no predetermined ceiling. This belief also becomes self-fulfilling, opening pathways to continuous growth that others never experience. To make your cognitive upgrade permanent, you must systematically replace fixed mindset programming with growth mindset programming. Here's how. First, identify your limiting beliefs about intelligence. Do you secretly believe you're not a math person, or not creative, or not good with abstract concepts? These seemingly innocent self-descriptions are actually powerful neural programming that limits your development. Next, create replacement statements that contradict these limitations. For example, my mathematical thinking is developing every day, or my creativity expands the more I exercise it, or I'm becoming increasingly skilled with abstract concepts. The critical step is consistent repetition of these new programs, especially during moments of intellectual challenge. When you encounter a difficult problem and feel the urge to think, I'm not good at this, immediately counter with this challenge is making my brain stronger. This is an empty positive thinking. It's strategic neural reprogramming based on the scientifically established fact that your beliefs about your abilities directly impact your neurological development. Your brain physically grows in the directions you believe growth is possible, and atrophies in areas where you believe improvement is impossible. By consistently reinforcing growth-oriented beliefs during your daily life, you ensure that your enhanced cognitive abilities continue expanding rather than plateauing. One of the primary reasons people fail to maintain cognitive enhancement is impatience. They expect complete transformation in days or weeks rather than understanding that profound neural development occurs over longer time frames. Average thinkers operate on short feedback loops. They try something for a brief period, don't see immediate dramatic results, and abandon the practice. Geniuses think in extended time frames, understanding that compounding intellectual growth creates exponential rather than linear results. To make your cognitive upgrade permanent, you must extend your mental time horizon. Here's how. Create a clear 5-year vision of your intellectual development. Rather than focusing on what you want to accomplish next week or next month, ask, What will my thinking capabilities look like if I train my mind consistently for the next 5 years? Write a detailed description of how your mind will function 5 years from now. How quickly will you process information? What types of problems will you solve effortlessly? How will others describe your thinking abilities? What intellectual domains will you have mastered? Review this vision daily, using it as a compass for your cognitive development rather than expecting overnight transformation. This shifts your focus from immediate results to long-term compound growth. This extended time frame doesn't mean you won't experience significant improvements quickly. You will. But it prevents the discouragement that comes when progress temporarily plateaus or when certain aspects of development take longer than others. By maintaining a 5-year vision, you ensure consistent application of cognitive enhancement practices through the inevitable fluctuations in visible results, allowing the compound effect to create transformational change over time. The final and perhaps most crucial strategy for making your cognitive upgrade permanent is creating strong boundaries against mental pollution. Your brain's development is heavily influenced by the information you consistently expose it to. Most people unknowingly fill their minds with content that reinforces mediocre thinking patterns. To maintain and enhance your new cognitive capabilities, you must aggressively protect your mental environment. Here's how. First, conduct an information audit. Track everything you read, watch, listen to, and everyone you regularly interact with for 1 week. For each input, ask, does this strengthen or weaken my thinking capabilities? Does it reinforce genius-level thought patterns or average ones? Next, systematically eliminate sources of mental pollution. This typically includes social media feeds filled with reactive, emotional content, news sources that prioritize sensation over substance, entertainment that celebrates anti-intellectualism, conversations focused on gossip, complaint, or surface-level topics, any information source that relies on intellectual shortcuts rather than rigorous thinking. Finally, intentionally curate a mental environment that reinforces genius-level thinking. Surround yourself with content created by exceptional thinkers. Seek out conversation partners who challenge your assumptions and push your intellectual boundaries. Create physical and digital spaces that minimize distraction and maximize deep thinking. This doesn't mean isolating yourself from all mainstream content or becoming intellectually elitist. It means being strategic about what you allow to influence your neural development, understanding that every input either reinforces or undermines the cognitive patterns you're working to establish. Now you stand at a crucial decision point. You've learned the techniques that can transform your thinking. You understand the daily practices that rebuild your neural architecture. You know the strategies that make these changes permanent. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people who receive this knowledge will never apply it. They'll find it fascinating, perhaps even share with others, but then continue thinking exactly as they did before. They'll remain trapped in the same mental patterns that have limited them their entire lives. A small minority will take a different path. They'll implement these techniques consistently. They'll follow the daily blueprint. They'll make the lifestyle changes necessary for permanent transformation. And those individuals will develop cognitive capabilities that place them in an entirely different category of thinker. The difference between these two groups isn't intelligence, willpower, or luck. It's simply the decision to apply knowledge rather than merely possess it. Intelligence becomes extraordinary through application, not acquisition. So the question now is, which person will you be? The one who found this information interesting but continued thinking the same way? Or the one who used it to fundamentally transform how your mind works? Because once you start implementing these methods consistently, your brain will never function the same way again. The neural pathways you develop will permanently alter how you process information, solve problems, and experience reality. In the next chapter, we'll address the challenges that come with enhanced intelligence, the potential pitfalls that have derailed many brilliant thinkers, and how to navigate them successfully. Because true genius isn't just about thinking differently. It's about applying that difference effectively in the real world. Intelligence is power, but like any power without proper control, it can become destructive, not just to others, but to the person wielding it. History's greatest minds often walked a dangerous path. Tesla died alone, surrounded by his brilliant but unappreciated ideas. Einstein, for all his cosmic insights, struggled with personal relationships. Nietzsche's penetrating intellect eventually drove him to madness. As your mind evolves using the techniques we've discussed, you'll begin to see reality differently. Your thoughts will move faster. You'll perceive patterns invisible to most people. You'll question systems others accept without thinking. This cognitive transformation brings extraordinary capabilities, but also significant challenges that must be mastered. In this chapter, I'll show you how to harness your growing intellectual power while avoiding the pitfalls that have destroyed many brilliant minds. Because the goal isn't just to become exceptionally intelligent. It's to channel that intelligence effectively while maintaining psychological balance. The smarter you become, the more difficult it can be to connect with others. Most people engage with reality on its surface level. They discuss trivial topics, accept conventional wisdom without examination, and operate from unquestioned assumptions. As your mind develops deeper analytical habits, you'll find these interactions increasingly unsatisfying. This creates a dangerous fork in the road. Many developing geniuses choose isolation. Withdrawing from social connections, they find intellectually unstimulating. Others develop intellectual arrogance, viewing themselves as superior to ordinary minds and treating others with condescension or contempt. Both paths are destructive. Isolation deprives you of valuable perspective and leads to intellectual echo chambers where your ideas go unchallenged. Arrogance blinds you to your own limitations and destroys your ability to influence others, rendering your intelligence ultimately ineffective. The solution is building a high-level network while developing strategic communication skills. Seek out intellectual peers who can challenge your thinking. People smart enough to tell you when you're wrong. Quality matters more than quantity. Learn to translate complex ideas into accessible language. True intellectual mastery isn't shown by making simple things complicated, but by making complicated things simple. Use your enhanced perception to understand others rather than judge them. Your intelligence should help you connect more effectively with different minds, not separate you from them. Remember, genius is not measured by IQ alone, but by impact. To have impact, you must be able to communicate your insights effectively and build alliances with diverse thinkers. The higher your intelligence, the more your brain excels at analysis. You'll see multiple angles to every situation, identify potential problems in any plan, and generate alternative approaches to any goal. This analytical power is a strength, but it becomes a weakness when it prevents decisive action. Many brilliant minds get trapped in analysis paralysis, endlessly examining options without ever making decisions. They become idea generators who never execute, thinkers who never build, theorists without practical impact. To prevent this paralysis, implement these execution-focused techniques. The 70% rule. When you're 70% confident in a decision, act. Don't wait for 100% certainty. It rarely exists in complex situations. Genius is built on adaptation, not perfect prediction. Decision timers. Give yourself strict deadlines for analysis. Set a timer for important decisions. When it ends, you must choose a direction, even with incomplete information. The experimental mindset. Frame actions as experiments rather than final decisions. This removes the pressure of perfect choices and accelerates learning through rapid testing. Intelligence without execution is potential without realization. Train your mind to think deeply and act decisively, understanding that imperfect action usually teaches more than perfect analysis. As your intelligence develops, you'll begin seeing uncomfortable truths about the world. You'll recognize manipulation in media and marketing. You'll identify flawed logic in widely accepted beliefs. You'll notice how systems often reward compliance rather than excellence. These realizations can lead to cynicism, disillusionment, and even despair, emotional states that undermine both your happiness and your effectiveness. Many brilliant minds have fallen into darkness, not because of their intelligence itself, but because they lack strategies for processing what that intelligence revealed. The solution is controlled detachment, seeing reality clearly without being emotionally consumed by its imperfections. Observe without absorption. Notice societal patterns and systemic flaws, but don't let them dominate your emotional landscape. Focus on creation rather than criticism. Use your insights to build better alternatives rather than merely pointing out what's wrong. Play the game strategically. Understand existing systems well enough to operate effectively within them while working toward better ones. True intellectual power isn't just seeing problems, it's maintaining the emotional stability to solve them. Advanced thinking consumes significant neural resources. Many brilliant minds burn out because they don't manage their cognitive energy effectively. They work in extended marathon sessions, jump constantly between complex problems, and never give their brains adequate recovery time. This leads to diminishing returns, creative blocks, and mental fatigue that could take weeks to overcome. To sustain high-level thinking long-term, you must train your mind for endurance. Work in focused intervals rather than extended marathons. 60 minutes of intense, undistracted thinking followed by a 10-minute complete mental reset is far more effective than hours of continuous effort. Use physical movement to refresh your cognitive resources. Even brief activity, a short walk, simple stretches, or basic exercises can dramatically restore mental clarity when you're approaching exhaustion. Alternate between different types of thinking rather than hammering at a single problem. Your brain has different cognitive modes: analytical, creative, strategic. Switching between them allows partial recovery while still accomplishing meaningful work. Intellectual endurance isn't about thinking constantly, it's about thinking optimally. The most profound insights often emerge after periods of mental rest, when your subconscious has processed complex information outside your awareness. Ultimately, intelligence is a tool whose value depends entirely on how you use it. If poorly managed, it can lead to isolation, overthinking, cynicism, and burnout. But when properly directed, it becomes a force that can transform not just your life, but entire fields of human endeavor. The key is understanding that intelligence comes with responsibility. Your enhanced cognitive abilities don't separate you from humanity. They deepen your connection to it through increased potential for contribution. Advanced thinking isn't about intellectual superiority. It's about intellectual service, using your capabilities to solve problems that matter. This requires balancing raw intelligence, IQ, with emotional intelligence, EQ. Understanding not just ideas but people, not just systems but values, not just what is possible, but what is meaningful. The true masters of intelligence are those who harness it as a positive force, building rather than criticizing, connecting rather than isolating, acting rather than merely analyzing. They use their minds as precision instruments rather than blunt weapons, applying different thinking styles to different challenges with strategic intent. In the end, the question isn't merely how smart you can become. It's what you'll do with that intelligence once you've developed it. Because the ultimate measure of your mind isn't its raw processing power, but the impact it has on the world around you.